Hello and welcome back to Precon Decon, the video series where I deconstruct the pre-constructed decks of Magic the Gathering's history. So we are now starting on what I am calling Season 2 of this video series. We're going to cover from 8th edition all the way up to Eventide, which is quite a lot of decks, so I guess the best thing to do is just to start off. What we're going to do first is look at the decks from 8th edition. So this was the first set really showing off the new card frame, and it was very controversial at the time. I remember, like, a lot of people didn't like it. They thought it looked like like Microsoft Windows, which I get. I personally don't mind the new card frame. Well, it's not the new card frame anymore; it's the previous card frame. Just because I thought it made cards like more legible. It made them easier to read and to understand. It made the text a bit clearer, so I didn't mind it. But yeah, anyway, so for 8th edition we had five intro decks, as we usually do with core sets. They're all monocolored. They're all only 40 cards, and they're quite simple contents. Like the cards are aimed at beginning players, so they're quite simple. So what I'm going to do is just like I did with 7th edition, I'm just going to review all of them in one video, and then going forward, what I'll do is dedicate one video to a deck as I normally do. Anyway, let's start looking at these cards. So the first one is Lifeboost, which is pure white. So we have 16 creatures, 3 instants, 1 artifact, 3 enchantments, 17 lands, and mana curve off to the side there. So, white weenie deck, basically, just to kind of show new players what white does. So we have 2 Suntail Hawks, just a 1/1 flyer, 2 Tundrils, which is a 1/1 first strike, 2 Crossbow Infantry, which is a 1/1 with range strike. For 1, does 1 damage to an attacking or blocking creature when it taps. A single Diving Griffin, which is Flying and Vigilance for 2/2 at 3 mana. 2 Angelic Pages, which is 2 mana, 1/1 flyer. Taps to give a attacking or blocking creature +1/+1. And a single Seasoned Marshal, 4 mana for a 2/2. Whenever it attacks, you can tap a creature. That's fine. And then I guess because it's white at this period, so all it really does is life gain. So you have 3 Venerable Monks, 3 mana for a 2/2, gives you 2 life. Angel of Mercy, 5 mana, 3/3. Flyer that gives you 3 life, and Staunch Defenders, 5 mana for 3/4, gives you 4 life when it comes into play. So yeah, nothing really too interesting going on here, in my opinion. So one of the rares is Blessed Reversal. So 2 mana instant, you gain 3 life for every creature attacking you. In a lot of ways, I usually think this is just worse than like Fog or Holy Day, because you can still potentially take damage from this if your opponent's attacking with only like a few big creatures. This is not really going to help out if if like a couple of like 6/6 flyers are coming in or something. So I think this is like a pretty bad rare to include. I feel like if say if a pair of new players got some of these decks to try out, this would maybe feel like not a great rare compared to some of the rares in the other decks. But anyway, single Chastise. This is all right, I think. It's maybe a little expensive. 4 mana, destroy an attacking creature, and you gain life equal to its power. I'd say that's actually better than Blessed Reversal, honestly, because at least it's dealing with the threat and giving you life. And a single Healing Salve, which is either gain 3 or prevent 3 damage. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously Healing Salve. It's kind of weak. And then the other rare in the deck is Glorious Anthem, just an enchantment that gives a weak creature +1/+1. That's kind of exciting for a new player to pick this up and be like, oh, that's cool. It's a simple, easy understand effect that feels very strong. Single Pacifism. This is the pacifism art we're going to have basically for about 10 years, I think. So get used to Grack. We have a single Spirit Link, which this is still pre-lifelink being keyworded, so it's just whenever enchanted creatures deal damage, you gain that much life, which for 1 mana is fine. In some ways, actually a little bit better than lifelink, because you can put this on an opponent's creature, and it kind of, if you were really desperate, you could, and then it kind of nullifies the damage they would do to you directly. You'd have to be so desperate to do that, though. and a single ivory cup. So this is one of the original like Lucky Charms that used to be. It was an alpha. I think it was an alpha. It was definitely at least beta. But yeah, 1 mana artifact. Whenever a player casts a white spell, you can pay 1 if you do gain a life. Very very weak effect, honestly. So it could have been. So I think there's some options here for potentially better cards. Peach Garden Oath. I'm actually surprised not in here. So maybe a quick note on Peach Garden Oath. So the whole point of 8th edition, I think why there was the change in card frame is that it was celebrating Magic's 10th anniversary. Like we've just had the 30th anniversary, and it's weird. We've had controversy around the 30th anniversary as well. At the time of recording, it's been about a week or maybe 2 weeks since they announced like the $1,000 boosters, which are essentially proxies. Anyway, so what they did for 8th edition, as well as updating the card frame for the core set, they included at least 1 reprint from every set that had been in the game so far. Peach Garden Oath is from the quite rare Three Kingdoms Portal set. Which is interesting actually to include that, and I think there's maybe one other card they reprinted in 8th edition from Portal Three Kingdoms, but yeah, I think this has been a fine card to include anyway, ignoring the kind of trivia about what set it's from and where it's been reprinted. 1 white mana to gain 2 life for every creature you control. Yeah, it's fine. I think it's better than like Healing Salve or some of the other cards in here. Noble Purpose I think would have been a fine rare as well. 5 mana enchantment. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage, you gain that much life. That's kind of what you want to be doing. Story Circle would have been good. Maybe a little too good. Maybe for these introduction decks, just to potentially lock down a color when it comes in. Sarah Angel, like again, it's an intro deck where Sarah Angel is not in it and she's such an iconic. She's still rare at this point. It's a few years before she gets downgraded to uncommon. Yeah, just crazy that Sarah Angel is still not in these intro decks, and I don't think she is in 9th either. Anyway, let's move on to the blue one, Sky Slam. 15 creatures, 6 instants, 1 enchantment, 1 artifact, 17 lands, mana curve off to the side there. Right, so it's mono blue, so we're just going to have flyers and kind of control options to introduce new players to that. Blue is always feel like the hardest color to kind of teach to new players, because like white, green, and red are very straightforward, because white is you play lots of creatures, green is you play big creatures, and red is you shoot people with spells. That's fine. Black is then usually, I feel like, the next hardest to teach, because like a lot of the mechanics rely on new players doing things they maybe don't want to do, like pay life to draw cards or sacrifice their own creatures, that kind of thing. Blue, I always feel, is like the hardest one to teach to new players, because you've really got to understand like tempo and control, like when you bounce things or counter spells, you've got to understand that, and also the creatures generally aren't that don't generally have that high power or toughness, so like they can feel a bit weak. But anyway, so move on. Let's talk about the actual cards rather than the color itself. So single air elemental, just 4/4 flyer. I do not like this art for air elemental. I think this is the last time it gets used though, which is good, because this art is not great. I generally like Wayne England art, but this one is it's a real miss for me, honestly. We have a single Fighting Drake, just 2/4 flyer, and 2 Wind Drakes, which is a 2/2 flyer. Yeah, these are fine. They're just no thrills flyers, good and evasive, and 2 Horn Turtle. Absolute core set staple, 1/4, just blocker on the ground. Yep, all absolutely fine. So one of the rares is Fleeting Image, so 3 mana for a 2/1 flyer. You can pay 1 card and a blue to return it back to owner's hand. I think this is fine. It serves obviously as a really good like chump blocker. It can block something and then just bounce back to hand before damage is assigned. Yeah, I think that's pretty good, because we're at the point now in the game where combat damage is not using the stack. Was that in 8th edition, or I can't remember, that might be 10th edition, or M10 that gets introduced. Well, I'm sure someone will correct me in the comments. We have a single Avon Fisher, just a 2/2 flyer. When it dies, you draw a card. Yep, perfectly fine. Spiketail Hatchling. Spiketail Hatchling is pretty great. 2 mana for a 1/1 flyer, and you can sack it to counter a spell unless its controller pays 1. So it's just nice to have that on the board until you need it. Means that someone always has to essentially be 1 mana ahead of curve to get a spell out. And then 2 Thieving Magpies, 4 mana for a 1/3 flyer. Whenever it deals damage to an opponent, you draw a card. Yeah, again, like perfectly fine card to have. Quite like Thieving Magpie. Coastal Hornclaw is, however, not great. So 5 mana for a 3/3, so already overcosted, even in blue, I would say. And you have to sacrifice a land to give it flying. So this is a reprint from Prophecy, which is, if you look back on my Prophecy videos, Prophecy is a very weirdly designed set because so many cards require you to sacrifice land because the theme of that set was like either having like no land or having no untapped land. It was weird. So a lot of the cards, like, oh, if you sacrifice your land, then it'll be fine. This is just a bad card. This would have been one of the first you would have taken out or just ditched as a, if you got this deck and you're a new player. Phantom Warrior, though, this Phantom Warrior is great. 3 mana for just 2/2 unblockable. Like, I think that's still good even today, honestly. Single Puppeteer, 3 mana for a 1/2, 1 blue to tap or untap a creature. That's I think that's a good flexible effect. Just have a Twiddle whenever you need it. And then a single Sage Owl, 2 mana for a 1/1 flyer, and rearranges the top 4 cards of your library. Yep, it's perfectly fine. Basically set up your next 4 turns, really. And then some spell options. So Dehydration. This is kind of overcosted. It's just the enchanted creature doesn't untap during its uncontrolled's untap step. This is really expensive. What it does, like we see this effect these days. Usually when it's on one of these blue auras, these kind of lockdown auras, it usually taps the creature you attach it to. Because if this goes on something that doesn't need to tap to attack, it does nothing. It's useless. I mean, you could then combo it with Puppeteer, but such a weak combo. Single Mana Leak just counters unless someone pays 3. Yep, really good. Perfectly good counter spell. 2 Remove Souls, which I always thought sounded like a black spell, but it just counters creature spells. Unsummon, classic unsummon, just returns creature to hand. And then the other rare is Urza's Armor. So 6 mana artifact. If a source would deal damage to you, prevent 1 of the damage. This used to be uncommon. It's been upshifted to rare. I think it makes sense at rare, especially in a core set. Because I think that's a fairly strong effect to have, like in a core set, usually where the power level is quite low. But yeah, I think that's perfectly fine. So it could have been, I think instead of Fleeting Image, because Fleeting Image feels a little weak to be a rare, honestly. I think you would have just had Mahamoti Jin, just big 5/6 flyer. I think a new player would have been really impressed by that, just to drop down a huge flyer. Curiosity, I think, is a fine aura. Put it on a Thieving Magpie to essentially get double draws. Essentially turns any creature into a Thieving Magpie. I think that would have been fine in here, or on, Phantom Warrior goes really well on that as well. Deflection, again, could have been a rare, maybe instead of Urza's Armor, just to give more, to show a new player what blue does. Even though this effect is now red, really, I think. It's sometimes blue as well these days, but at the time it was definitely a blue effect, where you can change targets of spells. That's pretty cool. And then Twiddle, I just thought Twiddle is just a fine little trick just to have. Anyway, I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit because I think I'm talking too much about certain cards. So we'll talk about Expulsion now, which is the black deck. 15 creatures, 2 sorceries, 2 instants, 3 enchantments, an artifact, and 17 land. So a bunch of black creatures. So 2 Severed Legion, which are a 2/2 Fear. Maggot Carrier, who's a 1/1 for 1 when he comes in. 3 of those. When he comes in, every player loses 1 life. 2 Death Gazers, who's 4 mana for a 2/2. Basically has bad Death Touch. It can't kill black creatures. So whenever it becomes blocked or becomes blocked by a non-black creature, it gets destroyed at end of combat. So it's really, really janky Death Touch, basically. 2 Dusk Imp, it's just a 2/1 flyer. Apple's Spectre, 4 mana for a 2/3 flyer. When it deals damage to a player, they discard a card. That's a big theme of the deck is showing off that black does discard. And then 4 Ravenous Rats, classic Ravenous Rats, just 2 mana for 1/1, makes an opponent discard. Perfectly good little common there. And that's all the creatures. And then we have a single Coercion, which is a targeted discard effect, which is all right. I don't think we've seen Coercion get reprinted for ages now. They've kind of strayed away from discard spells, I think, these days. Maybe it's because it just feels really unfun to discard your cards before you get to play them. Larceny is the other rare. So whenever a creature you control, not the other rare, haven't even seen one of the other rares yet. What am I talking about? Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, they discard a card. And Megrim, whenever an opponent discards a card, Megrim does 2 damage to them. So yeah, we're definitely doubling down on the on the discard theme. Single Sever Soul, this is just kind of an expensive removal spell. Kills a non-black creature and you gain life equal to toughness. 2 Dark Banishings, destroy a non-black creature but you don't gain life. And the other rare is Disrupting Scepter, so 3 mana, artifact, 3 and tap. Target player discards a card. Activate it only you can play this only during your turn. So it's not activate only when you can do a sorcery. So this you could do this on your turn mid combat if you really needed to. So yeah, that's basically the black deck. So what could have been here? So really upset there's no Drudge Skeletons, honestly, because Drudge Skeletons is such a core set staple. Just 1/1 regenerator. Primeval Shambler I think would have been okay as well. Like it's 5 mana for 3/3 with a shade ability. So you spend black mana and to give it power and toughness increase till end of turn. Necrotal, this would have been, this is when its creature type was still Necrotal instead of like Human Assassin, which it is now. So it's 4 mana for a 2/1 first strike. When it comes in, it does Terror, which is okay. So alternate res. So I think these would have been honestly better res, because the thing is, so there's a heavy discard theme in this deck. The thing is, there's a point in the game where like ultimately your discard spells do nothing, because you've either made your opponent discard you make them discard so much that they're almost then essentially in like kind of top deck mode. So yeah, so then you've got discard spells that like in your hand which can't do anything. So I think Underworld Dreams would have been fun, because this means then you've got Megrim that hits them when they discard, and then you've got Underworld Dreams that hits them when they draw as well, which I think would have been fun. Well, maybe not fun for them, but a Millstone I think could have been a rare as well, just to mill them. So like mill is like is like advanced discard, I suppose. You're making them get rid of it before it even hits their hand. But yeah, I think those would have been fine rares to have as well. Right, move on to the red one, Speed Scorch. So 15 creatures, 4 instants, 3 sorceries, 1 artifact, 17 land. Mana curve to the side there. Right, so it's a bunch of goblins, which is actually very similar to the 7th edition one, which was basically the only kind of like tribal deck, and it's the same here as well, because like goblins are really the only tribe in the core set, I suppose, mostly because there's just a lot of goblins that could be reprinted. So 4 Goblin Chariots, 2/2 haste for 3, 4 Goblin Raiders, 2/2 for 2 that can't block. We're still a long way off red being able to have the 2/2 for 2 with no drawback. Goblin Glider is a 1/1 with flyer that can't block for 2, which is really tragic, but yeah, like this is again a time where red just did not get cheap flyers in any way. 4 Raging Goblin, the classic Raging Goblin who raged at the world and his family, but mostly he just raged. So he's a 1/1 with haste for 1. And then the 2 rares are both goblins as well. So one of them is Goblin King, who is arguably the better of the rares. 3 mana for a 2/2. This is it's before he becomes a goblin himself. He's just a lord. He's just pretending to be a goblin. All goblins get +1/+1 and have Mountain Walk. So yeah. That's fine. Pumps up with goblins. And then the other rare is Mog Sentry. So this is like a weird rare that was from Plane Shift. So 1 mana for a 1/1. Whenever an opponent plays a spell, it gets +2/+2 till end of turn. Like, okay, fine. Not, I'm not impressed by Mog Sentry, honestly. And then some red spells. So we have an Enrage, just a pump spell. +X/+0 till end of turn. Yep. A single Guerrilla Tactics. This is such a weird spell. I've always thought Guerrilla Tactics is weird, and like it's such a weird card to include in a core set as well. So 2 mana instant, does 2 damage to target creature player, unless something makes you discard it while it's from your hand, in which case it does 4 damage to a creature player. I get the flavor of it, but it's such a weird card to me. Yeah, and also like it punishes like black rather than like blue or white. You would think if it was something like if an opponent gained life or draw a card during your turn, then you do Guerrilla Tactics. But yeah, it punishes someone making you discard, which is, I don't know, it just feels like kind of off color. I don't know. Because we see this in green. I'm going off tangent here. We see this in green a lot. Or not a lot, but enough that like if use like a big green creature, like if something makes you discard it, you can put it straight into play instead, which makes sense because black usually has discard effects, and green is black's like enemy in the color. But anyway, I'm really fixated on how weird Guerrilla Tactics is. Anyway, single Lightning Blast. Yep, just 4 damage target creature or player, 4 mana, which it's fine. Shock, lovely Shock, 2 damage to a creature or player for only 1. Yep. Blaze, classic Expel, just X damage to creature or player. Demolish. I don't mind Demolish. Just because, you know, yeah, 4 mana destroys an artifact or a land. I always thought like, you know, like if you can't hit an artifact with it, which is ideally what you want to do, you can at least hit a land with it, so it always has a target. I don't mind Demolish. And then Volcanic Hammer is just kind of like not great. Just 2 mana sorcery to do 3 damage to target player. Kind of a lot of redundancy, I feel like, in the burn spells in this deck. And then a single fodder cannon, which goes well with all the goblins. 4 tap sacrifice creature does 4 damage to target creature. If like that's a really chunky amount of damage. Yeah, you definitely wouldn't mind sacrificing like a raging goblin to that to just blow up an enemy creature. So it could have been. I think Panic Attack would have worked well here. Just makes creatures unable to block. Yeah, you got a lot of goblins. You're going to be attacking with them. You probably want to do this. Then instead of Mog Sentry, because Mog Sentry is honestly like a pretty bad rare. I think one of these 3 would have been fine. Like either Relentless Assault to get an extra combat step, which would have been fine, or Brass Herald, which gives you a second Lord essentially, and lets you dig for goblins. So yeah, Brass Herald's really good. Weirdly, this was uncommon at the time it was printed, and it always felt like it should have been rare, and it is rare here because I guess it's quite a strong effect, honestly. And Coat of Arms, it should have just have Coat of Arms, and I'm going to use the same argument I did in my 7th edition video. It should be in the Goblin deck because it mentions goblins in the flavor text, in the reminder text, so it definitely belongs in here. Anyway. Either of those 3, I think, would have been a lot better than Mog Sentry, who's honestly kind of weak. Anyway, move on to the last one now, which is Heavy Hitters, which is the green one. 15 creatures, 3 instants, 1 enchantment, 3 sorceries, 1 artifact, and 17 land. So, bunch of big green creatures. 2 Hunted Wampus, which is a 6/6 when it comes into play. Every other player can get a creature into play for free, which is potentially a huge downside, but you would hope that you've got a 6/6 for 4 mana. It should hopefully be able to outmuscle whatever your opponent plays. Llanowar Behemoth is kind of a weird card. It's 5 mana for a 4/4, and you can tap another creature you control to give it +1/+1 till end of turn. Which is, it just feels like a very weird card, honestly. It doesn't feel very green to me for some reason. 2 Lone Wolves, 3 mana for a 2/2. It can deal damage to your opponent as if it wasn't blocked, which is it's kind of like super trample. I mentioned this in the 7th. I'm going to keep going back to the 7th edition. I don't mean to, but there's I don't think anything in this set had trample, and I think there was like a design document or like a column or something. So like, oh, we didn't put trample in a core set because we thought like new players would find it too complicated. But then you have regeneration on rocks. And like regeneration is way more complicated as an ability, or like protection as well. Protection is like way more complicated than trample. But anyway, a single Nantuko Disciple is 4 mana for a 2/2 Insect Shaman. You can bend 1 green and tap it to give a creature +2/+2 land turn, which is honestly pretty good. And he wasn't any of the precons in Odyssey block where he was first printed, which is weird because I think it's a pretty solid common, honestly. So one of the rares is Primeval Force. I think this is from Portal, just because it's kind of janky. So 5 mana for an 8/8. But when it comes into play, you have to sacrifice it unless you sacrifice 3 forests. Like, okay, you're down 3 forests. Potentially, okay, you play this, let's say you play it turn 5, possibly earlier if you got ramp. You get rid of all your forests, and now you've got like an 8/8, but it doesn't have any evasion, so it can just be chump blocked forever. Yeah, I'm not fond of Primeval Force. Rocks, I think, is much better. 6 mana for a 5/5 that it's got super trample and it's got regenerate. I think that's just a much better, much more impressive card. And then a couple of Spined Worms, just 5 mana for a 5/4, which is, that's pretty good for the time, honestly. And then we have like some ramp options. So we got some elves, because obviously that's iconic green as well. So 2 Elvish Pioneers. I always thought this was pretty good. This would have been a pretty good like turn 1 play. When it comes into play, you put a basic land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. I just think that would have been a good turn 1 play. Going to turn 2 with like 2 lands down already. Anyway. Findhorn Elder is just kind of like a bigger Llanowar Elves. But he's like 3 mana. Like it kind of defeats the point of him being a mana elf because like you really want a mana dork to be able to play early, and like you can't get him until like you might be able to get him like earlier because of Elvish Pioneer. But yeah, ideally like he's a 3 mana value. You might not be able to drop him. You can't drop him first turn. But then it gives you double green, which is okay. And then 2 Wood Elves, who I think are pretty good. So 3 mana for a 1/1. They search up a forest and put it straight into play. It doesn't come in tapped, which is really good, and it doesn't have to be a basic forest, which does matter. Not in 8th edition, not in these decks definitely, but like just for future constructed play that does matter. And then 2 Rampant Growths. Moving on to the spells, so you just search up basic land, put it into play. Yep, put in play tapped even. Yep, Rampant Growth is great. Like Rampant Growth. 2 Giant Growths. We know Giant Growth +3/+3 to end turn. Yep. A single lure. I think lure is like always is a pretty great green, iconic green aura. Just means you whack it on something expendable, you attack with everything, and everything else gets through. Just think it's great. Single naturalize, destroy artifacts or enchantments. Sure. Rod of Ruin. I guess it makes sense in green because you got no way of doing direct damage. So yeah, but it's very expensive, 4 mana, and then the activation is 3 in tap, which is it's fine, I suppose. And then a single wing snout, which is 3 mana sorcery to destroy a creature with flying, which is expensive and niche. So then what could have been? Quite a few options here, I think, could have made this green deck a little better. Blanchwood Armor, I think is like a classic green enchantment that definitely could have gone in this. Just make any creature into a threat based on the number of forests. Revive gets any green card from your graveyard back into your hand, so the entire deck, basically. Yavimay Enchantress gets +1/+1 for every enchantment that's in play, so it's not just yours. You could have leaned more into have more auras, I guess, more enchantments. And then Vine Trellis is kind of a more traditional mana dork. It's 2 mana for a 0/4 defender and taps to add green because they didn't have Llanowar War Elves in 8th edition for some reason. There was a reason for it, and I can't remember what it was, but they didn't have Llanowar War Elves. And then other 2 potential rares. So I think you could have had one of these instead of not rocks, instead of Primeval Force, because Primeval Force is honestly kind of bad. So Call of the Wild, I think, would have been fine. 4 mana for an enchantment. You pay 2 and 2 green. Top card of your library. If it's a creature, you put it into play. Otherwise, it goes into graveyard. Yep, I think that's fine. You've got your mostly creatures in this deck anyway. Or Collective Unconscious, 6 mana. Just draw a card for every creature you control. That's pretty strong as well. Good way to reload your hand when you've got a big load of creatures out. But yeah, so in summary, what do I think of these 8th edition decks? So I think they do their job in showing a new player what each color does. I do wish there were 60 cards, or ideally 30, because then you could buy 2 and then mash them together and make a 2-color deck. That'd be okay. Or you could do that with them anyway, but you have a 60-card deck then, which is the norm. Of the 5, I think probably, I think they're all okay. I don't think any of them is particularly weak. I think the black one goes too heavy on the discard theme. Same as white. I think white goes too heavy on the life gain theme. I think the blue, red, and green ones are all okay, basically. Just 8th edition just is honestly not a great selection of cards, despite drawing from every set in the game's history up until this point. 8th edition really not a great selection of cards, honestly, and we'll see the same in 9th edition when we get to it. 9th edition is very, very similar to 8th, but then 10th really kicks up a notch. But I'm talking way and way in the future. We've still got loads of decks to get through then. So, if you've got good memories of these decks, if you, got into the game using these decks, or if you just picked them up to play them, have a kind of a more simpler play experience, please leave a comment below. Tell me what you thought of these decks. If you changed them, or what you think of them after seeing the deck list. I'd really like to know. Stick a comment below. But yeah, no, I'll be back next time. And I'm going to start looking at Mirrodin, which is the first expansion set that was released after this core set. So yeah, that's going to be interesting, talking about Mirrodin, which is quite a I've used the word controversial a lot in this video, but Mirrodin was a controversial block, as we will see. But that'll be in the next video. But until then, thank you for watching and listening, and have a great day.